molto allegro.
Do re mi fa mi re do.
Do re mi fa mi re
Do re mi fa sol la sol.
Do re mi fa mi re do re
Do re mi fa mi re do re mi fa sol la sol mi re do ti fa.
Good evening, folks, and welcome back. Here at the Trekosophy Labs, we're constantly striving to make you a better show. So using the latest and 24th century technology, we have gone and genetically engineered our hosts to be some of the best available in any podcast anywhere. Now sure, they might have a few little quirks and side effects from all this, but overall the results have been phenomenal. First, there's our technical guru, the man who makes everything possible. He had his intellect genetically augmented so that he could handle all of our fancy computer equipment. The only side effect is now he thinks he's a fictional character in a late 20th century science fiction television show. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Chris McGee.
Yes, and every time I say something funny, I pause to give the audience time to laugh.
And then we have our resident author who had himself genetically augmented to survive in any climate at any time. Only as a side effect, he now thinks he's an 8-foot-tall invisible rabbit. It's Brandon Kirby.
I'm the mythicist in Alice in Wonderland.
And our fearless leader who had his philosophy genetically augmented. Only now he finds he is incapable of turning left. It's Ben McLean.
Now I only have to install one set of blinkers.
And I am Bill. And I am Bill Allen, a.k.a. the genetically augmented guy in the red shirt, and this is Trekosophy.
Woo!
And tonight, we're going to go back and talk some more about genetic engineering.
Topic that we haven't talked about in a little while. Been meaning to continue this discussion.
So we're talking about the benefits.
Side effects this time.
Side effects.
Yes. Last time we talked about the dangers of how, the best intentions, well-laid plans, all that good stuff.
When was that?
That's how long ago it
That was last year.
Yeah, last year.
Oh.
It was one of our episodes where we dealt with Khan and how you try to create the greatest leader and you end up making a tyrant and,
Huh.
And then as soon as you
doesn't even remember at all.
well, we had a big long discussion on that. But was Brandon even there that day?
Yeah, that's a good question. He may not have been. I don't recall.
Kirby doesn't either, but that doesn't tell you much.
Or the
Maybe he
alcohol
was
may have
just
wiped
too
his
drunk to
memory.
remember.
Exactly.
It's that Harvey syndrome kicking in. He thinks he's an invisible rabbit, so he's...
Well, okay. Side effects. Let's talk about the side effects.
Yeah, and specifically, I suppose we're talking about the Council of Geniuses that was featured on Deep Space Nine, the genetically engineered people who were all insanely smart, but they were also all insane because
The misfits.
wasn't quite done right.
They also weren't very nice people, especially Jack.
Well, one of them was nice. You just didn't see or hear much of her until the second time.
Yeah, Serena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jack
think-
was absolutely off the rails. They toned him down a little bit in the second episode, but the first one, he was just malicious.
Well, I think that was on purpose. I mean, that was Jack's character.
Yeah. I'm not saying it was badly written, just definitely.
I think that
nuts.
they were trying to suggest a certain insensitivity to human, certain ranges of human concerns, as is evident in people with severe autism.
Well, and also how they've been treated. They've been treated like they're misfits thrown away from society, obviously they're going to have some resentment towards that.
Well, I think there's something at play here that Chesterton warned us about. And it was the concept of Nietzsche says man is a thing to be surpassed. Well, surpassed in what criteria? Enhanced in what way? Because generally people who are the Ubermensch, as Nietzsche put it, the giants, we tend to cut them down, and they don't do very well. They have to be superior to us, not only intellectually or physically, but also morally. Because the standard whereby someone is enhanced is something that the rest of us take note of. Otherwise, we tend to react quite negatively. That's what we do to a Napoleon, a Caesar, Ramses, and so forth. So what happened to them is in keeping with historically how we have treated people who are great minds, ambitious, and so forth.
Well, I think that there's a lot of fear in there as well. We fear someone who has better abilities than us.
Fear, yes, but also if they're just legitimately better, but they're not better in certain areas, but not morally superior, you tend to do things that just aren't so nice.
Hence the misfits.
Hence they become misfit for society, and they go very far because they're so talented in not conforming with society or not fitting in well with society, and that causes trouble.
I'm trying to think of stuff to say here, but it's kind of, I don't know, lots of trying to gather my thoughts.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, I was thinking we'd talk about Bashir rather than the Misfits. I think we need to talk about Bashir first and then them later. I mean, they come along to primarily to, I think, create conflicts for the character of Dr. Bashir more than anything else.
Yeah, that's true. But when you talk about Bashir, you talk about someone who didn't have any side effects, at least none that we could see on screen.
Oh, I think we see them.
Please elaborate.
Well, you notice that Dr. Bashir is kind of clueless about, well, like right in the beginning, right from the beginning, he's kind of clueless about how different things he says might be perceived by others.
Okay.
But
even in
his
first scene, well, you write it off as, he's just a green ensign in his first scene. But then you find out he's way too intelligent to have made a mistake like that.
See, here's the problem, though. Obviously, the writers didn't even intend for him to be genetically augmented until, the 5th, 6th season, something like that?
Right.
So all of that stuff that happened in the 1st and 2nd season and so on was unintentional. It was meant to make him look unsure of himself, clueless, etc. But I see where you're going with this in that, they can retroactively say that he was unsure of himself and clueless because he had some side effects in that manner from the genetic alteration. Is that what you're basically saying?
Well, what I'm saying is that people who have autism or high-functioning forms of autism, even where you wouldn't be able to tell, are nevertheless often clueless about certain things about social interactions, taking cues and things that other people sort of sense automatically. They have to actually be sort of consciously taught things about social interactions that other people just sort of naturally pick up.
Yeah.
And Dr. Bashir has that in spades. Even before it's revealed that he is a genetically enhanced person who, and all that. So I just think, what? Sorry,
go
what?
ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I just
Finish
think
your thought.
that the genetically enhanced folks are basically about what we call autism, or that they're at various points on what psychologists call the autism spectrum. And I'm not sure the idea of the autism spectrum is necessarily a fully valid idea. I mean, there might be some problems with it, but as far as the people who actually get diagnosed on the spectrum, the episodes that feature these characters are, I think, drawing on experiences with those types of people for the writing of them.
Okay, let me ask this. What is that condition called where it's like a lesser version of autism? Is that Asperger's or something?
Asperger's, yeah, my brother has it.
What is that exactly? Is that where you can function in society just fine, but you might miss the more subtle things in life?
Well, yeah, it's similar to Jack's character. There's a lot smaller abilities in terms of empathy, but he's certainly a heightened intellect.
I sometimes wonder whether or not I have a slight version of Asperger's myself, because there's a lot of things in life I don't get until it's way, way too late to make a difference.
Yeah, there's gradations of it.
I think we might be verging towards hypochondriacing us all, because I mean, I'm trying to think of a polite way to say sometimes we're clueless because we're clueless, not because something's wrong with us. We're not perfect. And in the case of Dr. Bashir, for example, I don't think that his social ineptness and his social blindness was due to him being deformed or defective the way the other augments in that little group were. I think he was just a clueless. I mean, he was the youngest guy on the staff, and he had spent his whole life with his nose buried in books, studying and learning all this stuff. So he had no practical experience or real world connections to really flesh out what life was all about until he got to Deep Space Nine. So sometimes people are clueless because they are just not sharp enough to know what to look for. Even if you notice everything, you got to be able to know what it means in order for it to mean something.
Just being socially awkward.
Yeah, Bill, your point is probably quite valid, except that it doesn't actually lead us away from the issue of Asperger's syndrome and the autism spectrum, because that is a debate that has been going on within the field of psychology in the last 10 to 20 years about whether it's even a good idea to have a diagnosis like Asperger's syndrome or not, and how the signs of it are so subjective to interpret, and how labeling it a syndrome suggests that it's a mental illness, when there are high functioning people who would obviously be diagnosed with it if there was a diagnosis of them or an analysis of them to be made, who have contributed to society in quite valuable ways. By the thing about Asperger's syndrome is you tend to have obsessions with
That's true.
obscure knowledge, and sort
like
of
Star Trek.
Yes, and in fact, Star Trek. I think a lot of Star Trek fans would probably be diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome if they talked to a psychologist long enough. And in some ways, this is more of a personality type than it is what we might call a psychological condition, because when we say psychological condition, that suggests, someone who's, heavily autistic, who can't even, live independently. It puts people in the same category with that, when that is a very misleading characterization of their situation. And so this is all very complex stuff. On the one hand, some people do need some kind of help with certain things in life. Some people have to be taught certain things that other people just sort of naturally pick up, like as far as social interactions go, and have to actually sort of explicitly think out what certain social cues mean, rather than where others have just sort of naturally picked it up. The comparison with the end of the autism spectrum that the public is most familiar with, which is the more extreme end, is just completely misleading, and it's so misleading that it might be a better idea to just get rid of the characterization of Asperger's in the psychology texts altogether. In fact, there's an Asperger's. The thing about Asperger's syndrome is that it is. I was diagnosed with it myself at one point, and I don't know whether that psychologist was any good, because I know for a fact that he grossly misrepresented some of my answers in the notes he made, because I glanced at the notes he made. But that's not the point, though. The point is, there are sort of Asperger's pride groups, which I'm not expressing support for. I'm just pointing out that they exist. And there are groups that want to get rid of Asperger's as a diagnosis altogether. And in some ways, Asperger's, when it doesn't stop you from doing anything that you want to do, is more like a different way of looking at the world than it is like a complex. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But when you have people who act like the misfits in Deep Space Nine, then you obviously have a problem. I mean, they haven't got just an alternate way of looking at the world. What they've got actually is a sort of weird deficiency.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of in a nutshell what the difference is. I mean, everybody is socially awkward because they just don't know how to do certain things. But eventually they can figure it out. Some people can't, for whatever reason, they can't figure it out. If it's a mild social awkwardness, they can muddle through and get by, but they're never going to learn that skill and learn how to do those social interactions. In the case of the augments featured in Deep Space Nine, they had their brains rewired at the genetic level to make them all so super smart, but that crossed a few wires and made it to where they physically could not overcome their quirks, their personality programming errors, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if it's impossible. I mean, if it was impossible, there'd be no point in trying to help them, It just may be that they have some difficulties.
It's impossible for them to get to a point where they don't need the help anymore, where such social situations are normal for them. Like,
how do you know? I mean, you don't know until they've got to the end of their life, Because if I recall, all the characters who were in the Misfits group were improving. I mean, they were actively learning and improving and mastering more subjects and working on this subject. They might get it better eventually. That's what Dr. Bashir is hoping for anyway.
And good on him, but it goes back to him being naive. I mean, the one who actually managed to fix it, they had to take her in for surgery to repair the damage. The rest of them, because social interactions, it's not a subject. It's like some people physically have no problems in cold weather, and other people can't stand it no matter what. Now, you can become acclimated over time to weather changes if you're exposed to it very often, but There are people who just won't. If it's too hot or too cold, it's always going to mess them up. Even if they get used to it being hot, they've still got to be careful. In a lot of ways, that's even though there is information involved in social interactions, it's more of a environmental response than it is knowledge applied to a situation. So, short of surgery, I don't see that there would really be a solution to what happened to those particular augments. In the case of,
I don't see how you could possibly know that.
Why not?
Well, because, like I said, their behaviors are based on the behaviors of real people with autism, or with various more extreme forms of autism. I mean, and it's just autism plus extreme intelligence is really all they are. And a lot of times autism and extreme intelligence go together in real life. So it's really not all that unrealistic of a premise. And people in that situation in real life do in fact improve their ability to live independently and to interact with others more usefully with various forms of training and working through some of their issues. And it just takes some work, but people in fact do it in real life. So that's just not necessarily true for people with autism in real life, or people on the autism spectrum, or however you say that.
So there are people who have had their autism cured?
Well, it's not a cure exactly, but there are people who have gone from a point where they are unable to live independently and they just have extreme problems communicating with others on any level, to people who can hold an ordinary conversation and shop for themselves and take care of themselves.
Oh, I'm not saying they'll never be able to do anything like that. I'm just saying they're probably always going
to be somewhat different, and they're probably always going to have to maybe pay conscious attention to certain things that most people don't pay conscious attention to. But they certainly can improve their situation considerably, or at least it should be possible for many people in situations like that to improve their situation considerably. You shouldn't just start out from the assumption that things aren't going to improve. Now, they'll probably never get to the point of where they just everything is as automatic as it is for most folks. But people work through stuff all the time.
Yeah, I wasn't saying they couldn't. That's what I was saying. I was saying that they're always going to have issues. Yes, they'll be able to learn and adapt and overcome, but they're not going to be able to stop. I mean, when you drive, the first few times you drive, you got to figure it out. And eventually you do it so often, you're able to do it almost instinctively. It's that muscle memory or learned response or whatever it's called. For a lot of things we do, there's an element of that to our everyday life about how many times you do something until it becomes a habit. And for some people, it'll never be a habit. It's always going to be, they can do it, but they're not going to, they're going to have to muddle their way through every time. It's in spite of their enhanced intellect, there are some things they can't learn. They can know it and they can understand it, but that next step where they can, okay, I know this, and they just do it because they've already processed that knowledge. It doesn't get fully processed or locked in. I don't know what the fancy biological term is for that kind of memory, but that was the point I was making. Yes, they're going to function better in society, but there's not really a cure for them. It's just them using their enhanced intellect to overcome the short arms.
Well, the psychological conditions, unless we're talking about really extreme schizophrenia or something like that don't just have a flat cure the way a disease might get cured. I mean, psychology doesn't work quite like that. People certainly do build up habits of paying conscious attention to things that other people don't have to even pay conscious attention to. And that's how they manage to, achieve more normal social relations. And so it does become a habit to pay attention and to remember what various things mean. But it doesn't. It's like, let's say you had someone who is let's talk about like Stevie Wonder. Okay, imagine Stevie Wonder. He's one of the world's greatest musicians. Let's just assume he is and not argue about whether he is. All right, that seems a reasonable opinion to say Stevie Wonder was one of the world's greatest musicians, at least in his genre. Okay, and he's blind. And I don't know what his life story is exactly. I just know he's a blind musician. I'm assuming he's always been blind. Is that correct?
I think so.
Let's just assume that's the case. And he starts to be able to see stuff. Well, but he still thinks in terms of sound. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He's been blind most of his life, and now he can see, but he still thinks in terms of sound. And he has to he'll still have the habit of, say, folding all of his dollar bills. Folding all of his money in a certain way so he knows which one's the 5 and which one's the 10 and all that stuff that blind people do.
Mm-hmm.
He'll have all those habits still. And some of them he might never change just because, just because he doesn't think of it as, something he did because he was blind. It's just a habit, Well, the whole overcoming at least as far as social interactions go, the whole overcoming autism thing, as I understand it, is like having to sort of consciously work at developing certain habits that other people take for granted. You do, in fact, get some of those habits, but you don't stop being you, The whole, it's what you might call, I think they call it a personality disorder when it's extreme. But when it's on the light end of the autism spectrum, it isn't even a disorder. In fact, in the case of Asperger's syndrome, it's like calling it a disorder is almost like the opposite of what it is, because the problem is there's too much order. Yeah. When a person who has Asperger's syndrome, if that's a legitimate diagnosis or a legitimate term to use, but someone who I think what they're getting at is someone with an excessively ordered personality. You see what I'm saying?
And I think that's actually why I would say that Stevie Wonder analogy of yours is bad. Instead of saying, oh, it's Stevie Wonder and one day he can see, you should have gone with Matt Murdock, a.k.a. Daredevil from the comics. Blind his whole life. Always blind. But the other senses compensated to such a degree that it was practically like being able to see. He's never seeing anything. He's always just relying on sound and touch and taste and all that. But it's just like being able to see eventually, but he's still blind.
Yeah, kind of like that. Except that the person in this situation has all of the regular senses. We have to keep in mind the limits of this analogy. They have all the regular senses, and the problem they have, or at least the difference they have, is either a failure to interpret the input or just an interpretation that's different from everyone else's.
I've got a...
Does that make sense?
Yeah?
Okay. I'm certainly not an expert on this stuff.
Well, I've got a question that might take us back to the episodes a bit.
Please do.
Yeah, we did wander off, didn't we?
Well, we're Trekosophy. That's what we do. It's a question of what Kirk said about Khan, that superior ability was combined with superior ambition. With the enhanced folks in Deep Space Nine, they had enhanced knowledge, but it also seemed to give them enhanced arrogance or pride about what to do with the knowledge. I was thinking in terms of coming up with calculations that said the Federation couldn't beat the Dominion even with the Romulans joining the war in an uprising on Cardassia. And both of those things contributed to the Federation winning, so they were wrong. They made statements that was well outside of their field of study, or their fields of study, and they thought they were right. They thought they were so right, they were willing to betray the Federation to hand secret information over the Dominion because they thought they were right about their calculations that turned out to be flawed. And what I thought was interesting about that was it made me think of Socrates in the Apology, where he's questioning the politicians to find out they're trying to bring about goodness for the land, but they don't know what goodness is. Okay, well, the politicians don't know anything. They talk to the poets who said they're trying to capture beauty, but they didn't know what beauty was. So he said, okay, well, the poets don't really know what they're doing. But then he talked to scientists, and scientists actually did know a lot of things that Socrates didn't. He found they had a lot of knowledge. The problem is that the scientists became so arrogant with that knowledge, it made them make statements outside of their field. And they said it with the same forcefulness and the same level of authority, but it wasn't grounded in anything.
I fully agree with this account of Socrates.
And that makes sense. I mean, what does every Star Trek captain say? Never tell me the odds, because Spock or whoever the science officer will always tell you the odds of success for successfully doing whatever impossible thing we're about to do are astronomically low, and they do it anyway, and it works.
Yeah, why would you trust?
I think that's mostly a Spock thing.
Well, and you've got C-3PO and Han Solo. It's the same situation, but with the augments, these are the odds of beating the Dominion. You don't know that.
I must agree, because of all the free will and other variables that there's just no way to account for in advance. There's no way they could know that. But there's a good sort of ethical question that might be worth considering, and that is, would they be justified in their actions if they did know for sure that their calculations actually were correct?
No, because they wouldn't know what the Dominion would do once they took over. They could have exterminated the humans if they took over Earth.
Okay, so that's a consequentialist argument, though.
No, but that's the only one that would make the argument work.
Well, you don't think that, for example, Kant would say you're committing betrayal. Committing betrayal is wrong, period. And,
exactly, that's the thing. Every other ethical theory, other than utilitarian consequentialism, however you say it, every other ethical theory would condemn it.
Yeah,
You
so
lost me.
Okay.
Well, remember our time travel episode?
No, I don't remember.
Oh, well, we talked about there being 4 different ethical systems when we talked about whether it was okay to kill baby Hitler.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and there was
4 different ethical systems, yeah.
Yeah, and there was utilitarianism, rule-based utilitarianism, deontology, and social contract theory.
There's more ethical theories than just that, but
yeah, those were the ones we talked about.
The argument that they gave to defend their actions was Ben called it consequentialism, which basically says the consequences, we're going to be saving lives by betraying the Federation to the Dominion because we're going to end the war a lot sooner.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, that basically saying the consequences are good. Yeah, we're not the nicest people for doing it, but greatest number of good for the greatest number of people.
Mm-hmm.
But my argument
Looking at
is
the big
you don't even
picture.
know, even on those utilitarian grounds, you don't know that that's true. You don't know that, yeah, sure, every other ethical theory is going to say, no, you can't betray the people who were kindest to you. No one's going to support that except for utilitarian theory. But even on those grounds, let's say the Dominion took over Earth, what would they do with it? They might give them the blight. They might infect them with some disease. They might just exterminate them once they're orbiting the planet. Like, you don't know what the Dominion was planning on doing with Earth. So that argument was nonsense.
Well, I guess we assumed that the Misfits had already anticipated all possible outcomes to that question of what the Dominion would do with Earth. But like you said, if they had chosen to just completely eliminate every inhabitant of the planet, then yeah, you're right, that would invalidate it. So I don't know how they could have incorporated that into their way of thinking.
I'm asking the ethical question. If they had all knowledge and all of their sources of information were correct, would their action in betraying the Federation have been the right thing to do in that case?
Okay, so assuming the consequences really would have been less.
Yeah, that's my question.
So assuming they weren't overstepping their intellectual boundaries, which they were,
Yeah.
then in that case, you'd have to be a utilitarian. And I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, the point I'm trying to raise
is utilitarianism.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Some episodes show some of the problems with it, but the point I'm trying to make is I think that their utilitarian premise is wrong, even if all of their science and powers of predicting the future were correct. I think their utilitarian premise is wrong.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the thing that stood out to me about this one is you've got a history of captains like Kirk who didn't believe in no-win scenarios to the point where he cheated on the Kobayashi Maru, and he managed to so many times do the impossible when he should have been defeated. He managed to outwit the smarter, stronger, faster enemy and win. So here you have these genetically enhanced super people, and they're supposed to be smarter, better, faster, and they only see the fact that losing is inevitable. If they're so smart, they should have. Why couldn't? I mean, Kirk could figure it out, and he wasn't that smart. Why couldn't they figure out some way to win the no-win scenario? They just wanted to give up and throw in the towel in order to reduce pain, which is noble,
right.
But it's not really winning. I mean, anybody else, they'd keep fighting until they found a way to win.
I guess it depends upon the time frame that you're looking at. If you're looking at the immediate future, you're losing. If you're looking at hundreds of years into the future, you're winning. So it depends on your scope, the scope of your argument.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, in order to think that what they were doing was noble, you have to be utilitarian, because natural law theory, which begins with us living in a society, Kant, all of these are going to boil down to the fact that you're double crossing your comrades. And so the question in my mind is that I want to put forward to a utilitarian who thinks it's a noble thing to do. What if I could keep my parents alive using expensive health care that's really draining our economy?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know to the extent that tax dollars go into it in the States. You guys would have to give me an education on that. But in Canada, we've got tax dollars that fund health care and use up a lot of resources. And maybe it might serve to drive up insurance premiums in the States. Again, I don't know enough about that. But along comes someone and says, okay, well, I'll just kill your parents and that'll be better for everybody. Or better yet, I could say, hey, I'll just kill my parents and that'll be better for everybody. Would that be an ethical thing to do? Well,
Are we assuming that you have foreknowledge that it would indeed be utilitarian?
yeah, let's just, well, I mean, again, the concept of these people actually doing something to help the Federation is the assumption in the question. So, yeah, the assumption here is if I kill my parents, I prevent them from using up valuable resources.
Okay.
So society's benefiting because I kill my parents. Well, there's that. Yes, there's the utilitarian judgment, but then there's every single other ethical theory that says you're killing your parents. What is wrong with you? How is this even a debatable question? The force of that argument imports itself into the force of were they doing something beneficial? No, I agree with Cisco. I agree with O'Brien. It's just insane to betray your people. I say this not as a patriot, just as a concerned ethicist.
Well, this is definitely quite an interesting ethical discussion we stumbled upon here. Unfortunately, I don't think we really have time to explore it much further.
Yeah, I mean, that about covers it. Just the point I'm making is, I don't like utilitarianism, and I think that, the kind of error they're making wouldn't be possible under almost any other ethical system.
Yeah.
I still like utilitarianism, and I think they screwed up by the numbers, because I think even under utilitarianism, they missed something, because as smart as they were, they should have found a way to win and then reduce the body count even further.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I said about scope, you could even take the scope to the extreme and say, well, at the end of time, we're all going to die anyway, so why bother?
Well, without changing the facts, which Bill just tried to do is change the facts. Without changing the facts, there's one way you can rescue utilitarianism from the critique of this, and that is to go with rule-based utilitarianism. Under rule-based utilitarianism, there's no way their action would have been justified, because you can't make a rule that if you make all these calculations, then it's okay to commit treason. That you can't make that a general rule. And so rule-based utilitarianism would say no to this. It's only the radical individual kind, loose cannon utilitarianism that could justify what they were trying to do.
Okay. Well, I guess this is probably as good of a stopping point as any. So we'll probably pick this back up again, if not next week, one of the following weeks, and continue our discussion on genetic manipulation. And we'll actually look at the positive aspects of it in the form of the Jem'Hadar. Work your mind around
Dr.
that
Bashir.
one. In the meantime,
that was Bill who said that. I don't think the rest of us would agree.
Oh, I can
agree.
convince you. Next time, I'm going to do my best to
this part out. We're going to let our audience try to figure that one out for themselves until we actually record that.
Well, this one here was the Misfits episode. This wasn't really the Dr. Bashir episode.
It was the side effects episode.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's just get us an outro, and we'll call it an evening.
Well, folks, that's all the time we have for tonight. We're going to scrape these specimens back into their test tubes and try again next week. Thanks for listening. You can check us out at Trekosophy.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, email your questions, comments, concerns, complaints, fan mail, pictures of your dogs, all that stuff. Trekosophy@gmail.com. Download us from the iTunes store and feel free to leave a review. Hopefully we'll be bringing you some cool stuff in the next few weeks. Thanks for listening. Thanks to the host for joining us, and see you next time. See, we should do that little sing-along bit for the end like they did. Do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do.
Yeah, and he needs to not drink so much. That last time, he really stopped making any sense.
Yeah, but when do any of us ever make sense, really?
That's a stupid question.